I'm not like becoming accustomed to struggling less. I think actually my tolerance is probably higher. I think I'm just trying to be more attuned to my honesty with myself around what inspires me or what motivates me.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin, and welcome to the Struggle Climbing Show, where I talk with elite climbers about their struggles and breakthroughs in training, nutrition, tactics, and mental game. How y'all doing? I hope you're having a great day. I am having an awesome day because I love this interview so much. Today, we are chalking up for a chat with one of the most accomplished and thoughtful boulderers in the world, Aidan Roberts. Man, I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, like the better part of the year here, and I was just thrilled when our mutual friend, Hazel Finlay, made an intro, and Aidan was traveling a lot. He was up in Finland working on Burden of Dreams and bouncing around, but we caught him back at home in the Lake District. And look, he doesn't need much of an introduction, so I'm just going to try and get us to the interview as quickly as possible here today. But worth noting, I think, is that Aidan, by all accounts, has just had the absolute year of his career, sending not one, but two new boulders with a suggested grade of V17 or Font 9A. Holy smokes. I'm talking about Arrival of the Birds in Switzerland and Spots of Time right there in his backyard of the Lake District. So we talk about those ascents in great detail and also where they stack up with the other V17s that Aidan has sent or nearly sent, Alphane and Burden of Dreams. We also geek out on Aidan's training routine. We talk about his training for like 45 minutes. It's so interesting how he trains up his already superhero level finger strength. We go deep into his mindset and how he stays positive when progress is slow going. And then we also explore how he's giving back to the climbing community through his creative work off the rock. I love this conversation so much. Now, speaking of the strongest fingers in the game, I do not have them, you guys. In fact, my fingers are objectively weak for the grade that I climb, at least based on all the, measurements that I've done. So I am putting a ton of emphasis on training up my fingers this summer, and I'm getting really scientific about how I'm doing it. I'm using the Force Board portable force gauge, and I love this thing so much. They're a sponsor of the show. I'm super grateful for it. And I use it multiple times a week for warming up before a climb, for building some capacity, and right now, especially for working on top end finger strength. Now, if you're not familiar with what a force gauge even is, it's like this little digital device. It's like smaller than a wallet, and it connects to your phone by Bluetooth. And then as you pull on a block or a portable hangboard, it tells you exactly the force that you are using. So you don't need to mount a hangboard, you don't need weights or pulleys to get the desired training stimulus, and you can track all of your data seamlessly and just like program all of your workouts right there in the app. And I have found, as well as many others, that training your fingers this way reduces injury. You're not hanging a ton of weights around you, and maybe you've got like low energy going on a certain day, so you're not hanging more than your body is ready for. The numbers are right there on your phone, and you know when to quit a session when you're not getting the stimulus. It just takes all the guesswork out. You can hit that link in your show notes to learn more. Pop over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/forceboard, and that'll give you 10% off your purchase by using code STRUGGLE at checkout. And also the show gets some love when you use that code. So you're supporting me, you're supporting you, you're supporting your fingers. It's just a win-win-win. I hope your training and your climbing are going awesome. And lastly, a huge thanks to all you patrons and subscribers out there. I couldn't make this show without you, and I just dropped a banger bonus episode with Aidan. It's like an hour long, and I'm going to tell you more about all that in a little bit here. But first, let's enjoy this spot of time with Aidan Roberts. So you're at your parents' home. Is that the one where you can spot Wordsworth's house from the back there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So this is the house I grew up with. I grew up in Central Lake District.
Wonderful, man. It sounds beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's quite special. It's a nice place to come back to, and it's just my mother who lives here now, but she's actually away for the next few weeks in Wales. So I'm kind of house sitting for the time being, looking after the garden. It's quite a simple life, so it's not bad.
You can wander lonely as a cloud back there and
wow.
tap into some of the Wordsworth. Beautiful, dude. It's a joy to meet you, dude. It's really a pleasure. I'm such a fan of your climbing and your writing, how thoughtful you are, your environmental advocacy, the whole kit and caboodle. So it's a joy and a real honor to be able to have a conversation with you here. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no, likewise. No, it's really lovely to meet you in this virtual realm. But yes, it took quite some time for me to be, it was definitely a busy little phase of travel and distance from media. So I'm glad we found a time to connect now.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have been quite busy. Of course, I've been following along as a patron of your show. I get a little behind the scenes looks of some of the adventures you have been having and a nice peek behind the curtain. And it looked like you were using up all of your EU days. Have those now been fully utilized? Are you stuck back in the homeland for a while now?
I think I do have some days remaining actually, but it was definitely a natural time for me to return to the UK. And actually I've been like pretty excited to kind of explore my locality a bit more. And I think having a project over the last year so close to home, namely Spots of Time, really like kind of made me realize the joys of projecting something as like a home game and real like how that differs from something internationally. So I think I really valued that a lot actually and felt a lot more settled living in the UK because lots of the people who are like quite important in my life are definitely based in abroad as well. But like most of my family and really close friends are here in the UK and it's quite important for me. So like I think long term I see myself being based around here and having like projects more locally feels really important. So I'm kind of on the lookout for those now.
I'm so excited to explore Spots of Time from that lens, just this idea of it being almost a backyard project to, contrasting it with some of the longer term projects that you've had your sights on and been working on that are quite a distance away and kind of juxtaposing some of that, the pros and cons of that, but also, the mental side. Of course, we were introduced through our mutual friend, Hazel Finlay, which I'm very grateful for. And we'll spend plenty of time, I think, peeling back on the mental and emotional side of this sport that we love so much. Well, why don't we start where we typically do, Aidan, and that's with just the notion of struggle and obviously a bit of a struggle of choice, a struggle of privilege here as climbers. But I'd love to hear what your relationship is with struggle as a rock climber.
It's definitely changed over the years. I hope you're happy for me not to be too concise with this, but I've definitely been someone who often, within my climbing, but like within other avenues of life as well, have been quite led by goal setting. And I've always been taken quite a lot of care before committing myself to goals for sake of like really understanding my motivations behind them and like kind of whether they are best suited to me at that time or not. And usually I make quite an informed decision before like setting these goals and like kind of there's an acknowledgement or an acceptance that at times like there'll be a degree of austerity and I guess that feels like struggle in many ways and like almost accepting that from the get-go. And then in more recent times, and I've often like followed quite like almost a rigid formula around setting my goals and kind of would be quite unmoving in them. And I maybe more challenged that narrative personally in more recent years in that I think maybe in the past, the goals I set myself were like more attainable or like in a shorter time frame anyway. And so it was like there were more factors which I had control over. And so like it was only really when I kind of felt to set myself more ambitious goals and like kind of suddenly the ball was slightly out of my court, that the degree of struggle or like austerity felt like to kind of tip the balance of what felt like particularly healthy or like kind of felt a particularly like a relationship with climbing that made me feel always like particularly happy anyway. And I was suddenly like challenged by this feeling of like the times where the struggle with the direction towards like a goal that I've set myself is like very much in contrast with like kind of what I'm like naturally motivated by. And so have maybe like tried to check in a little more and be a little bit less rigid with like my goals in like a time pressured sense. So like to kind of be almost, and I think we have the privilege, like as a rock climber, have the privilege of like time in that like, yeah, of course, if I was talking from times when I was doing competitions or like for the sake of like competition climbers, they don't have that luxury. But like at times where like I really don't want to be there and I am forcing it, I think I have the freedom to know the only person keeping me there really is myself, and trying to attune a little more to in the moment by moment, like kind of motivation around a climb. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like that like line of thought has been quite relevant for me in recent times, or it's something I've really learned to acknowledge. And yeah, feels like it relates quite well to this idea of struggle.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It does seem to have been a bit of a theme here more recently, especially with taking on this project, Spots of Time, kind of in your backyard and alleviating what might be some of those pressures, the time pressures, as you're saying. And I want to peel back a little bit more on that as we go through this conversation here. But I am curious just on this notion of how your relationship with struggle as a rock climber has evolved over time. Whereas now it sounds like you're maybe a little kinder to yourself, if that's the right assessment, maybe cutting yourself a little slack with regard to how rigid you're being with goals and with outcomes and these kinds of things, which again, I think we'll probably dive into quite a bit here. But do you find, just as a climber today compared to maybe a climber 5 years ago, that you are more comfortable kind of avoiding or creating opportunities in your climbing schedule and your paradigm there to not put so much pressure on yourself? In effect, is there less struggle in your climbing today than there was in the past, do you feel?
Yeah, and I'm sure I'm many times a walking, talking contradiction in lots of the things I say. It feels confusing in my own head, so articulating it might not always make so much sense, but I definitely feel like, so climbing definitely consumes a lot more of my life now than it has done in the past. Like I've kind of like, but that's been quite like a natural transition as well. Like it doesn't feel like I've forced that. Like I'm now a full-time climber, whereas in the past I've always, like before this I was like doing some work within climbing, and then before that like doing some climbing work, some like tuition, and then I was a student. So like it's kind of been quite a natural progression towards mostly solely climbing, and that's been quite natural in that I've had the energy for that, and that's been like definitely quite explicit choice. So I definitely have a lot more energy to put into my climbing, and strangely it depends how I would, I think my like hesitancy with this is how I like really define struggle, in that in terms of like the energy and effort that I put into my climbing, it's definitely much greater. So like I've like in more recent months, like I've trained a lot harder than I've trained in the past, and like that would be like volume, and just like it's kind of the first time where I've been like feeling like in a training season, I'm feeling like I'm full-time training in a sense that like when I'm not training, I'll train like in a training season, the training will be tiring enough that the time not training, I actually don't really have the energy to fill it with other things. Like in the past, I've always like been quite someone who like looks for stimulus quite a lot. And so like, I think especially when I was studying, I was like, oh, well, I can go to uni for like in the day, each day, because I'm just like sitting still. Like I was a mathematician, so I'm just crunching numbers, and like, I'm just sitting there like using my brain, and then I like can train before uni and train after uni, and they're like really distinct things. But like I've come to realize like they're really not, and it's all energy in many ways. And I think as I've taken training more seriously, I've really like understood how like important the recovery is, and like I've become more kind on myself at times when I feel incapable of like doing much, to not feel too harsh on myself. I think in the past, when like I just don't have the energy to do anything, I can be like quite self-critical, to be like, you're wasting your life. And then I'm a bit more patient now, and I'm like, okay, I had very little energy to do anything else. It's a rest day. Like, it's okay. Yeah. So I think in a sense of like in the moment, I think like I've definitely become more accustomed to like physical struggle. But I think I generally think of it more in like a long-term sense. I am quite careful to consider this, because I know what it sounds like to kind of like detach yourself from the outcome, or to like know when to step away when like my motivations feel like inorganic. In many ways, I've come to realize that that's like, it's not like that's a detriment to my success. Like, as in the places where I'm forcing it, or the times when I'm like really attached to like outcome, are not the times when like I climb best. It's like not the times when I enjoy the process of climbing as much, but I also am very unlikely to find quote unquote success in those moments. And so it's kind of like, I don't want to just make the case of this because it's like, oh, we should always be happy, because I'm still very much like myself. I still very much believe it, that like I would never want to not commit to goals for sake of like acknowledging that there'll be struggle along the way. I don't want to be like, oh, well, this is an amazing project. It's really inspiring. I have to get loads better. But I don't really feel like having skin problems or like training my fingers for another 6 months or something for that project. So I won't even consider it, kind of thing. Like I never want to be in that camp. Like I still am someone who sets myself goals, and like kind of, I think I'm just trying to more regularly check in the moment. So like, it's maybe that I'm not like becoming accustomed to struggling less. I think actually my tolerance is probably higher. I think I'm just trying to be more attuned to my like honesty with myself around what inspires me or what motivates me in like a shorter time frame, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool, man. I really appreciate the thoughtful perspective there. And it provides a nice segue, because you mentioned training as part of this, and obviously training can be a struggle depending on where we're at and what we're working on. It can't always be, not every day can be the most inspiring day as a climber, whether you're a professional or like me. So I would love to use that opportunity here to dive into training and explore it. Are you still psyched on training?
Great question. You caught me at a good time. Yeah, I kind of, I am psyched on training. I'm going to refrain from being dramatic. It's not like I'm having an existential crisis, but like I've like recently having gotten back from my European travels, and it was like, I'm wondering how far to go back with this. I could just say I'll go short story. I'm pretty psyched on training. Like, I'm back in the lakes for the next little spell. I'm like house sitting, looking after the dogs and the garden for the next couple of weeks. And so whilst I've been here, I've been in my boardroom really frequently, unrelated, got a pretty bad burn on my foot, making myself a cup of tea. So I'm confined to campusing on my board, and like, I'm still really enjoying it and still like kind of taking that pretty seriously. And like, I'm kind of distinguished, like essentially whilst I've been in the lakes, I have like routines and habits around training. And so I think it feels unnatural for me not to train. So I am trying to take care and be like, oh, am I just doing this habitually, or do I actually want to be there? And actually, I think I want to be there. But there is a bit more hesitation in that there is question marks in my mind as to why am I training right now? And I think a big part of that comes from, often I always have like a feeling of some direction within my climbing. And I think this is probably a time where I feel to have very little of that. And I think that comes from feeling like really clear direction over the last couple of years. And like, as I've gone more and more all in on climbing, it feels like these goals have become more and more clear. So namely, Spots of Time was a bit shorter term. That was like over the last year. But then the climb I did in Ticino shortly
like
after.
the midnight.
Midnight, formerly the Midnight Project. Now it'll be named Arrival of the Birds. And that one was like a little more long term. Like I kind of had that in my mind since I first visited Ticino, which was like over 2 years ago. And so I've kind of like always had those as like, they've always had some influence over my training. And actually upon doing that climb in Switzerland, it was kind of a bit of like a practice I've done. I do some journaling, but this was like a bit more explicit. It's a practice I've done with my coach, Ollie Tor. I've done it in the past where I almost like write a letter to myself, like kind of when I like kind of acknowledge something. And in the past, it's been like around like a performance phase, and it'll be like, okay, you're entering like a base training phase. You're like ramping up the volume and like kind of building some work capacity. And it'll be like, at times I've found it really hard to accept that like maybe some regression in certain areas of my training, and struggling like, and it would be like little things like to write myself notes to be like, okay, this is part of the process. Like you got to expect this kind of thing. But this was like a bit more of like, I kind of knew this feeling of like this sense of aimlessness within my like climbing direction was going to come at some point. And it was nice on my European travels. I was kind of just being quite spontaneous and like kind of following what I wanted to try on the next session. And like whilst I'm on a trip and like kind of thinking about the climbing and different like variety in people and places, like it's very easy for like to just be like very much living in the moment. And like I kind of always am really grateful to do that, and like projecting much less into the future. And then like landing back here, a little bit of recuperation. I kind of knew that I was going to be like a bit like, oh, what next? And so I'm kind of in that phase at the moment of like, wow, what is next? And like kind of, I currently don't think I have anything specific in mind that I'm training for. And I think I've come to realize that that is important for me. So I'd like to find that. But there is a certain element of, I do just enjoy climbing, and I enjoy climbing on a board, and even footless on a board is still fun for me. So like there is an element of like just enjoying training for the sake of training and like enjoying that in its own right. And I know some climbers who that is their entire relationship with climbing, and I can kind of relate to that in many ways. But I think this is working for me on a temporary basis, and I think I wouldn't train as much. Like, I think I'd struggle to train to the degree in which I've trained in like my like training windows or like training months in recent years without direction, for sure. Because I think it helps at times where you're like totally knackered and you've got some more training to do. Like, it's hard to be genuine, like, yay, that board session's going to be fun. Or like, that's actually a bad example. Usually board sessions are fun, but it's like this fingerboard and weight session is exactly what I want to be doing right now. Is maybe a little unrealistic. So I think I find, goals helpful for that sense, or having projects. So long-winded answer. I'm enjoying training.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy that you are, and even without a goal, because I share that. You know, it's if I've got the goal in mind and I'm training specifically for it, whether it's like trying to replicate moves or just like getting that one more set of deadlift in because I know it's going to help me, you know, prepare for my peak phase and this kind of thing. It is a little bit easier and more motivating in that sense. But to get some joy from just the act of training is certainly a nice place to be. I'd love to just geek out for a second here and talk about what a training week looks for you. We had Ollie on the show here not too long ago, and he's a very thoughtful guy, fantastic climber as well. And I've worked with the Lattice team on and off for the past handful of years, and really like a lot of the stuff they do over there. You're at, you know, the most elite level. I don't think I will be training like you, but I'm still fascinated and interested to hear what a training week might look like for Aidan Roberts, and maybe some of that will translate down to those of us who are weekend warriors. So can you talk us through it? How much are you climbing? How much are you doing some off the wall stuff? Give me a little bit of a breakdown here on what your week looks like.
Yeah, it varies a lot depending on what time of year. Like,
Sure.
I think my training going forwards will look quite different to how it has looked recent in like previous like training stints, because in many ways, like most of my preparation has been for like peak performance phases during my European trips. And post-Brexit, you get 90 in every 180 days in Europe for people from the UK. So essentially, I don't think I ever really maxed it out, but I'd go like somewhere between 2 to 3 months trips, and I'd like do like 2 per year. And the times, those trips would be like performance phases. So I'd just focus on the climbing outside. I do some supplementary training to like kind of stay balanced, stay recruited in like certain like muscle groups. And it was more like maintenance whilst I was on those trips. And then I would like usually come back from the trips totally knackered, would usually like have progressed in some ways, regress in other ways. And it would be like a little phase of building up work capacity, increasing the volume of training. And that would be like kind of how that would look in practicality. Like the conditioning or like off-wall training stuff would be like a lot more volume, low intensity, like higher number of reps, and I'd like kind of have like a building phase where essentially I'd just be quite tired a lot of the time. I'd be doing like a lot but less intense as like just I build some capacity.
And that would that be, we talking like weightlifting as well as hangs and these kind of like finger training as well? So lower intensity, higher volume.
Yeah. And like even like aerobic capacity and things.
Sure.
But yeah, I've always done quite a bit of off the wall training, and especially my last like couple of training cycles that have felt really like I've seen a lot of progress, have been whilst I've been based here in the Lake District. So I've got my home wall. I like having like total autonomy of that setup. So yeah, I can set replicas or change a style if I like, I'm looking for different stimulus. But generally, it's pretty finger intensive. I think probably preferentially, and just like often the things I've been inspired by have been quite finger intensive as well. And that board's always been pretty crimpy.
I mean, it has to be said for those who are listening and haven't seen a lot of your videos of you training on your board. It's wild. I was watching a video recently that you put up where it was like a crimper. It had to be maybe 6 mils at most, made out of brass maybe, or aluminum or something. It was like, it looked slippery and tiny.
Yeah, they were made out of brass. Yeah, that was actually, I don't know if you've heard of a root setter called Jake Mason. We got him on our podcast, and we'd been chatting to him. He'd been like experimenting. He'd made some lifting edges with another UK guy called Matt Cousins. And they'd kind of been making them out of metal, and we'd kind of got into that discussion. And he'd actually made these for a board in London. And he was like, I made them, and just like, they were just totally non-user friendly kind of thing. And she was like, I'll send them to you. But they're really low profile, they're tiny, and yet they're super heavy. Like, you obviously can't tell when they're on the wall, but when they arrived, it's like a credit card size of a brass, but yeah, pretty weighty. But yeah, no, they're interesting. Yeah, initially.
But you enjoy that. I mean, it seems like the board training, it's got a storied history in your part of the woods with like, Ben Moon and the schoolroom and these kinds of things, and seems to be quite effective for a lot of climbers. It's scalable. I can climb on a spray wall. I just have to use larger holds and better feet than somebody like you does, but it can give you the freedom to build a lot of power and to challenge yourself. And I've even seen you talk about, whether it was on your podcast or maybe on Instagram, setting some problems that you feel were amongst some of the hardest boulders you've ever climbed. Just, on your spray wall, there was one where you set a problem around a crimp, you said, that just seemed laughable at first, like totally unrealistic, but then it started to come together over time, and these have become long-term projects. So yeah, I'm curious about how important of a tool that spray board, just kind of a spray wall in general, or your home board is, compared to some of the more cutting edge things out there, like the system boards with the light ups and the adjustable angles, or all of the science behind lifts and hangs? How do you structure your training between maybe the less scientific, having fun and setting hard things for yourself on your wall, versus the more structured training?
Yeah. Oh, it is a good question. I mean, I'd say having a home wall and like autonomy over that setup as an influence on my climbing has been like massive. Like, but I think part of that is because I had set it up when I was much younger. Maybe I was like 15 or something, 14, 15. And at that time, didn't have access to many other climbing walls. So that was a way in which I could like quite regularly climb. But even kind of in more recent years, when obviously like I'm able to drive and I'd be able to like live in places with like I've had seasons of training in Sheffield as well, which like has access to a lot of different boards, and a lot of people migrate there from around the UK for sake of the training scene. But I think in terms of like, and it is fun, it's sociable, it's nice. A lot of good friends I have live in Sheffield, and it is always a great atmosphere. But personally, I think for sake of like the training benefits, I'm much better suited to have like my home training setup. And I think a big part of that is like autonomy of the setup, but it's also like the lack of distraction. I think I almost find it easier to focus and kind of, I feel like generally over a long training season, it feels like I can get more out of it without like, I mean, it's a balance, right? Because like, I don't want to just be like a hermit and a recluse and make loads of training benefits. Like there is like a real value for climbing being a sociable thing as well. But I do find it's really helpful to like kind of have so few distractions. Are you a bit of a solo trainer?
I do prefer to train solo for the most part. And I think for the similar reasons. Now, if I had more time, I've got 2 kids and a job and this podcast. And so I'm just quite strapped for time. So I find that if I go to the gym when there aren't a lot of people there, or I have a little spray wall in my basement as well, I'm just able to get the workout in and kind of get back to my life without, maybe I get sucked into a conversation, or I don't get all my workout done because there's a bunch of people and we're competing about who can send more moonboard problems or whatever, like it's just easier for me to like get the work done. But when I'm climbing, I love to climb with a group because I definitely feed off of that group stoke and the energy that can come from. I like a lot of positivity. I'm mostly a route climber, so I've got to have a belayer there with me anyway. But I see the more solitary side that you speak from as well, and it does seem like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like on spots of time, it seemed like it was quite a solitary project where you were out there often by yourself, compared to or contrasted with you've projected some of the hardest boulders in the world with what seemed like a great crew of climbers, from Sean Rabitu to Will Bosey and Sean Bailey, I think recently up in Finland in this. So I see both sides there. I think like with the right crew, it can help you to motivate and maybe work a little bit harder than you would by yourself, but it also can be a distraction, right? Yeah.
Oh, and it's definitely different climbing outside. Like I really like the process of puzzling around like projecting and like kind of all the nuance of like some micro methods. But I think doing that with other people is way more interesting. And it's really interesting to see how like people's creativity like aligns with their like kind of skill sets as well. And it's hard to know how much you are limited by things you're not best suited to until you see someone who's really good at it. Like,
right.
Like I've kind of like personally, maybe I know that like I don't know, an example of that is like I'm not very good in like an open hand drag, 3-finger drag position. And I've trained it a bit before, never like consistently, but like I'll train it a bunch on a fingerboard, see progression on a fingerboard. And then I'll be like doing my climbing and I'll be like, it's made literally no difference. Like, I don't really like, it kind of feels like, I'm like, this doesn't feel like a very useful skill, to be honest. now obviously that's partly in conjunction with the way I climb, but then I'll climb with like Sean Rabitou, who's amazing in that position, and I can see where it applies really well, and I'll be like, oh, okay, that is the potential of that skill and like kind of what it can offer, and like that's quite motivating. But then also in a much shorter time frame, I always feel like I get a lot of inspiration from spending time with people like that and being like understanding maybe how much certain like limitations in my skill set are actually limiting, or like maybe the potential of them. And that's always really been really motivating for me. But then actually in the moment of like sharing sessions, it's really fun to just bounce ideas off people, and obviously just like spending time with these good people as well. Definitely is quite fun. Yeah, I mean, I do really like to train with people as well. That is really nice. But like you say, and I'm sure you'll understand it if you're relatively time poor, it's amazing how much training you can get done in a solitary session compared to like going to a wall. Like
totally.
Generally, like Sheffield's a good example. It would be incredibly rare for me to go into a climbing wall without knowing multiple people there. And like,
right.
It's just, they're good people. And like, I'm relatively chatty. So like, I'll just chat to people and like, it'll be like a sociable time and I'll have a really nice time. But maybe I'd go for a fingerboard session and some conditioning that would take me like an hour and a half or something if I was at home, and I'm in the wall for like 3 hours because it just like takes a really long time to get going. And like, so there is like, yeah, I'm sure you understand the benefits of like having your personal training set up and like being quite time efficient with training as well.
Well, I appreciate the look at the peek inside your training life there. And as you said, there's phases that we all go through, but I do want to understand the week. So what does the weekly snapshot look like? And include rest days in there as well, like not just the things that you're doing, but maybe give me a play-by-play of what a week looks like.
Yeah. Okay. So I will give you an example week of like a base training phase when like I've built up some work capacity, and like, let's assume it's bad weather in the lakes. It happens a lot. I'm just training on my board. Like simplify as many factors as possible. Generally, if I'm climbing here at home on my board, I'll just like, it's pretty finger intensive. And so I can do like 3 days on, but usually I like sacrifice a little quality around the end of those days. So generally my routine would be, if I was going to run through my routine, I would like day one, well, I don't need to go through all my day, have a breakfast. I usually go for a swim in the river. It's quite nice. Good way to wake up, have breakfast, do some mobility. Then I would go on my board, probably late morning. And that will be like usually around maybe 3 hours. And that'll be like, say day one, that'll be like pretty maximal boulders. And like you say, I have like long-term projects, or I have like replicas, and like generally it'll be like I'll start the session with like really maximal stuff. It might even just be individual moves or like replica moves. Then the kind of almost the way I've like to structure my projects in many ways is like I'll have little projects that I will like kind of gather together into like a circuit of like 5 or 6 boulders. And in a training phase, they'll be pretty maximal projects. I'll have to like work them quite a lot to do them. And then I will like, as I go through the phase, I'll try and the like objective is almost to be able to try and do all of them in a session kind of thing. And yeah, usually it's pretty ambitious, but it's kind of like quite a nice bit of like motivation I have for like rather arbitrary boulders as well. So I'll do like my maximal boulders, and then I will actually do some like, generally I won't go to easy boulders. I'll be trying like pretty hard boulders, but usually like either my skin will give out on like the really small holds, or like just losing the edge on like the really small stuff. And I'll like kind of like go on to like slightly more open holds or like body tensiony things where like the emphasis is less acutely on the fingers. And I will make sure that I like usually get a reasonable amount of volume in these sessions. I mean, like I say volume, I'm not doing like 12 move boulders. My board is pretty small, but like you can quite easily fit like 8 move boulders if the moves aren't that big kind of thing. So like, yeah, I will generally make sure I get quite a lot of volume. And usually I'll finish those sessions pretty knackered, have some lunch. I usually have some stuff to do in the days. Usually try and procrastinate laptop stuff, do stuff in the garden, take the dogs for a walk, kind of thing. And then I would have an afternoon session before dinner that would probably be like, maybe it'd be like with warm up, an hour and a half or 2 hours, or maybe a bit less than, an hour and a half, say. And that will usually be like fingerboarding. So I always used to like fingerboard in the mornings and then train in the afternoons, but I've definitely like prioritized my board-based training. And I usually find it's a good indicator that I've built up some capacity if I can still have a high quality fingerboard session in the afternoon, because I don't know, after a trip, if I have a big board session in the morning, I couldn't even consider fingerboarding in the afternoon. It would just feel incredibly unhealthy. But like, it's a good indicator when I have the capacity to like feel like I can have a pretty maximal fingerboard session. Or I also do like, I'm an advocate for those like density hangs as well.
Right.
And I'll usually like combine those with like conditioning. And generally I like kind of break my conditioning into like individual muscle groups, which I like kind of cycle around. So like, say for example, on day one, I might be doing like weighted pull-ups and like kind of maybe I'll be focused on like lats and chest or something. And like, maybe it'll be like flies, weighted pull-ups, those kind of things. And again, it depends a lot on what kind of I'm focusing on, as to whether like the sets and reps, whether it's like generally strength focused, but like I've done like velocity, like power based stuff as well around those. But often I'll do like strength and velocity combined into like one session. And that might be like, pull-ups, bench press, low row kind of thing. So I'll basically have like an afternoon like session where like, fingerboard condition. And then the next day I'd kind of like follow this, the day would follow the same structure. But if I was going to do that, I'd probably change the style of the boulders between the sessions. So if I was going to like repeat that day, maybe the first day it would be like emphasis on like fingers and like more static body tension power. And then usually I'd have like some fatigue in the fingers, and they're like the things I'm more like careful with. So it would be like a more like powerful session on the board, on like kind of like slightly more open holds kind of thing, or like a footless board session. And then the fingerboarding would usually be like the density stuff, like the longer duration, less intensity stuff in the evenings. And similarly, the conditioning would be like focusing on muscle groups that I didn't focus on the day before. And then I'll have a rest day, and a rest day is usually a leg day. I'm a big advocate for leg days, which people joke about.
It's not a rest day. If it's a leg day, then it's just a leg day. You can't call it a rest day is, watching some TV.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. But yeah, I kind of think I mostly consider a rest day something where I don't use my fingers. Right. But usually I try and like rest the upper body as well. But I think I feel better for doing something.
And you even like the leg day. This is a hot take here, liking the leg day. What are you doing? So you're building power in your legs for climbing and heel hooks and this kind of thing?
Yeah, but I use my legs a lot when I climb as well. So I like the more body tension stuff and like pull away at the wall with my feet kind of thing. So yeah, it's not like I'm just doing squats and stuff. Well, I am doing some like but it's like generally I have a few favorite exercises. Like I like Cossack squats. So essentially it's always like strength throughout range of motion. So it's kind of like, it is strength, but it will help with like flexibility and like kind of like, but strength throughout the whole range of my mobility. So like
what's a Cossack squat? Is that like a pistol squat?
No, I'm trying to think how I describe this. You kind of go into like a very wide stance, and then you like squat down towards one leg, and it'll be like quite like it's quite like, you might see people do it like for like sake of mobility. It's like almost like a stretch, but I'll do it with weight. And this kind of like weighted mobility is something that I've worked with Ollie a lot over the years, and I've really so I'll do the same with like a pancake, like where you like straddle and then like you like lower your chest to the floor and I'll hold a weight plate on my chest. And I find like all the weight and mobility stuff really quite helpful for like when I am like using feet that are way out to the side or like near range of mobility, I still feel like I have like strength and in those ranges. And then, yeah, there's like, don't know if you know Copenhagen planks for like the adductors.
No.
It's like kind of like a side plank, but only the higher foot is on something like a chair or TRX or whatever, and the lower foot isn't. So it's essentially like really works on your adductors and for like compression of footholds and things. But I just do it on my toes, so it brings my calf into the whole thing as well. So yeah, I do quite a lot of leg stuff, but I usually like to do it separately on rest days. It feels like a way in which like, I think I often feel better in myself for doing some movement often just like completely inert days never make me feel, it's definitely psychological, but I usually just feel a bit stiff and like kind of I like prefer to do some movement. And then so often I would repeat that and just do like the 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. Sometimes I would like, in the past, I have like gone through phases where I would do like a really heavy day on the first day, and the day after that I would maybe do like leg day and like a fingerboard session, and then do another heavy day after that and then rest. So it would be like kind of like 3 days on, but the middle day would just be like very controlled. But it's very rare that I would have like 3 heavy days on the board. I just feel like the quality is so much lower. And so I generally would be like training 4 or 5 days on the board. I think it usually ends up 5, maybe every other. Yeah, it's 4 or 5. But anyway, I find that I can actually get a lot more volume of quality training done with more of those rest days, like with like resting more frequently than in times where like, I remember when I was training for comps and I'd do like 8 days on or whatever, but like you'd be doing so much that like the quality of your sessions or like kind of like the intensity of them just never felt so like constructive. And I mean, they're obviously training for something completely different, so it's not worth comparing to. But I definitely find that like, I guess it almost mimics somewhat what you would do on like a climbing trip as well. And not that I would like do all like the other training stuff, but like to be able to do a couple of heavy days on followed by a rest day feels like probably that aligns with what my skin could like manage outdoors as well. And I know there are times outdoors where like I will like be trying a project in the morning and then like I'll get psyched and try and climb in the afternoon as well. And like, I think left to my own devices, I struggle to like get going again. But definitely when I'm a bit more like habitually training multiple times a day, it feels like a little less harsh on the body.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, a cool look into the world of an elite climber. And while it is, significantly more volume and intensity than I would do, there's also quite a simplicity to it that I like. It's quite predictable. You're able to get your work done and adjust accordingly if you're feeling fatigued, and then just repeat. That wasn't a very complicated model that you laid out there, and significantly, it seems like, in at least the example that you just gave, the bulk of the work is around your board, your spray wall, at your home there, and you're either training strength on day 1 there with some more static moves on smaller, worse holds, hands and feet, it sounds like. And then day 2, a little bit more in the power where it's, I'm assuming, a little bit more dynamic. You're saying maybe even some feet off type stuff, but slightly friendlier holds. But you're still able to get it all done on this kind of pretty small little spray wall that you got in your basement there. And in a time where there's no shortage of very advanced training apparatuses and multi-million-dollar gyms and that kind of thing, which are awesome and certainly have their place. And for somebody like me that's a route climber, I think it is important to get in the lead cave and this kind of thing. But you're able to accomplish a lot on a wall there with some homemade holds and some holds that you've gotten from friends that have then prepared you to go out and send the hardest boulders in the world. And that's pretty impressive and it's pretty refreshing.
Yeah, I think I am an advocate for simplicity. I think like climbing as like the performance side of climbing feels too varied and too like nuanced to be like solved by science. Like as in like I understand how like all this the science around something like track cycling or something and all the marginal gains like is like incredibly important. Like it's like totally pivotal to like people's performance. But I think climbing will never be like that. And it's definitely not at the moment anyway. In that like the medium in which we perform is like always different. Like obviously like the boulders are the same, but like you go from one project to the next. And like I kind of think having something standardized is just never gonna really, it might be like a really close fit to lots of things, but I just never think it's gonna really be optimal for anything. So I think that's why I like having the freedom to kind of change the stimulus to match the goals, which makes a lot more sense to me. I definitely think the training landscape can very easily be overcomplicated in that there's almost like the burden of choice. And I think it is great to like kind of more modern climbing media and how much like training education is being communicated is like obviously great. Like you can go on YouTube and like learn so much, right. But like you're learning a lot from like quite nuanced perspectives. And I think it can be easy to lose one's way in like a field of quite complex discussions. I definitely feel like you probably don't have to overcomplicate things. I've always like felt like the simple model is like kind of, yeah, like the body benefits from like quite simple messaging. And like, I think it's probably not always constructive to overcomplicate the formula.
This episode here is supported by Fizzy Vantage, the official climbing nutrition sponsor of The Struggle. And just let me tell you guys real quick why I love Fizzy Vantage. Yes, their stuff is the best of the best when it comes to supporting my goals as a climber. And yes, it dissolves the best and tastes the best of any other powders, protein powders, collagen powders, any other mixes out there that I have tried. And I've tried all of them. But beyond all that, y'all, I just love that this company was created by climbers for climbers and is a very active member in the climbing community. Fizzy Vantage founder and legendary coach Eric Hurst has been a friend of mine for years now, but I've been using Fizzy Vantage products for years before I even had a podcast. And I got to know Eric. He's been giving back to our community as an author, a route developer, and a coach for decades now. And he created Fizzy Vantage to bring the best science-backed nutrition to our sport so that we can all feel and perform our best. I use their supercharged collagen and their PowerPlex vegan protein every single day to support my training and my recovery. It is crazy delicious. Plus, Eric's going to be hooking you all up with a sick deal here just for listening to The Struggle. You can hit that link in your podcast app or use checkout code STRUGGLE15 over at fizzyvantage.com to save 15% off any full-priced nutrition order here in North America, or you can pop over to the Banana Fingers and Epic TV online shops if you are in Europe. This episode is brought to you at zero cost thanks to our buddies over at Rungni. You guys know Rungni. It's Magnus Mitbo's company. They make amazing apparel. They make chalk. They make all sorts of rad stuff. And I want to tell you right now about their high baller shorts. They're brand new. The fit is incredible. I love the design of these shorts. I mean, obviously it's super hot right now. I'm climbing in shorts and these high baller shorts are absolutely fantastic. And they're great just out on the town. I love the way they fit. They're super durable. Basically, all the apparel that they make is really, really next level. The fit's fantastic. You can learn all about that over on their website. And you can also pick up some chalk while you're over there. I'm a huge fan of the Mag Dust Loose Chalk. I think it works fantastic. It does not break the bank. You can order yourself a bundle and stay chalked up for 6 months. And we're hooking you up 15% off chalk, high baller shorts, and really everything else over at Rungni. Hit that link in your show notes and use code STRUGGLE to score that discount, which also means you're supporting the show. Thank you so much. Have fun out there. All right, I want to talk about belaying here for a second and how important it is for performance. Like if you're about to punch into a crux move on the sharp end and your belayer short ropes you, well, there goes the send and also maybe your friendship. Well, here's some good news for your climbing as well as your relationships, and that is Petzl just released a new cam-assisted belay device that is specifically designed for lead climbing. It's called the NEOX. You've probably heard about it, and I have been putting it to the test in the gym and out at the crag here lately, and it is sweet, you guys. You can basically think about it as a gree-gree, which I'm sure you all know. It looks and operates the same, but there is some magic engineering on the inside of this thing that allows you to pay out slack quickly and so smoothly when belaying someone on lead. Like, there's almost zero friction. It's kind of like the old days of using an ATC, but with all the safety measures of a gree-gree. If you do a lot of lead climbing, you got to check out the NEOX. It's a huge evolution in belay devices. And because it's Petzl, well, you know it's the best of the best. From the gree-gree to the gree-gree plus and now to the NEOX, Petzl has got your catch. You can find the NEOX at your local gear shop. Pop over to petzl.com to learn more and to access the inaccessible. Let's shift now and let's talk about some tactics. And I'd love to look at this through the lens of a couple of your recent ascents that you've done and some open projects as well. First, I'll open it up generally before I bring in some specifics and just ask you if there's anything in the tactical sense that has been a struggle for you or that is a struggle for you when it comes to your climbs.
Definitely on trips where I head somewhere with a boulder in mind, or there's a boulder that really inspires me on a trip, and I find myself I can usually really tell when I finish a session if I'm oh nice, when can I next try this, excited for the next session. It's usually means that I'm pretty hooked, and it's slightly different. It's nuanced in that I can try something and being when am I next going to be here kind of thing. It's more when I'm excited for the next session. I often, and it's actually I keep relearning this. I'm really bad for actually necessarily practicing all these learnings. Well, no, I actually think I take quite a lot of care of it, but I'm amazed by how often I'm relearning this. Is definitely the most tactical struggle I've had on trips is skin, and it's so rare that I wish I'd tried something less. I can't remember a trip where I've had a project that I've been working on where I've been oh, it would have been great if I tried that a bit more. I always sway way too far the other way, and I kind of look back and I'll be actually, I got my skin to a place there where it's you're just climbing on scar tissue right now, and that's why these splits just keep relentlessly reopening. And yeah, I think definitely there is a certain degree of patience, and I think I struggle to not try something if I feel I have some chances. So this is an interesting one where spots of time differs to burden. Is spots of time, I kind of felt no time pressure on it because I'm not on a trip. I haven't exhausted a lot of resource to travel to this place. I don't feel any pressure to kind of perform in many ways on a project that literally 10 minutes drive from my house, 20-minute walk. I know my family are going to live in the lakes for many years to come. It's not that I didn't want to do it. I really was inspired by the climb, and obviously was trying a climb I'm inspired by. I do want to do it, but I kind of almost preferred it being a project than being a climb that I'd done. And I was kind of aware of that even when I was trying it. I was kind of I really want to do it, but I kind of almost don't really want to live the future where I have done it kind of thing, because I really like having this project. But because I really didn't feel that time pressure, if I had bad skin, I actually didn't have so many skin problems with that, but if I was if the conditions were bad, or I was really tired in a very specific way to that climb, or my skin was bad, I just wouldn't try it. I'd be doing other things, and that worked really well. In that I would only really be there if I was oh, I really fancy being there, and the factors I have control over are in my favor kind of thing. Whereas on a trip, often I almost feel a bit more aware of the time I'm spending in that place, and find it hard to kind of step away from something when I feel I have opportunities to if I'm really excited by a climb and really wanting to do a climb, I can sometimes find it hard to like step away and like kind of be climbing on other things when I'm like, oh, this is something that has like really captivated, really motivated me, and I could be trying it right now, but I'm trying other things, which like I realize is kind of crazy in many ways, in that like I enjoy the other climbing as well, but like I think genuinely I like would rather be trying that thing, and so usually I do that, but it's often to my own detriment. Like a good example is like on this recent trip when I was trying Burden, quite early into the trip, I think not super, but like relatively early into the trip, I dropped the last move, and was actually a really good go, because it was like I got there with a no tape, and it was like quite a close go. Like I kind of like was near the apex of the swing and hit the hold kind of well. And I had probably like, I'm trying to think, to be honest, like I had an open-ended trip. I think it was probably like the best part of like a month or something, probably less than that. But like I had like many weeks after that where I like kind of knew there would be like chances, and like I kind of like didn't really have to even, I had EU days for another like 5 weeks or something if I wanted to stay longer. Right. And I got a split on that attempt, and then like was kind of managing splits. I'd kind of like had, especially on my like back two on my left hand, kind of recurring skin problems where like splits would reopen. And I basically think I just kind of kept trying with like, I basically realized at some point that I could still do all the moves with tape, which was a bad realization, because then I was just like, sweet, now I can just keep trying it. I think had I not clocked that, I'd have probably like taken some time, gone elsewhere in Finland, which is what I ended up doing at the end of the trip anyway, when it got too warm, and then circled back round. But instead I was just like, sweet, I can do the first move with tape. I can do the rest of it with tape. And I think I never did it with like both fingers taped, but I subsequently dropped the last move 11 times in total. And I think I had like 3 tries without tape, and the rest were with tape. But it makes the last move so much harder. And I kind of actually think in hindsight, had I just like taken a week off and climbed on other things, I'd have had like much better chances. And I think it's an example where like it's kind of like being too attached to like the immediate outcome is that you're to my own detriment. And actually like, I don't really regret it, because like weirdly, I was still really enjoying those sessions. Even when I was climbing with tape, it felt pretty fun to be playing like the chances game. I'm not really that upset to like have walked away. Like I was pretty proud to see my personal progression in that style as well. And so like, I'm not too sad about it. Like I had a really good time trying it, but like it's definitely like tactical errors that I've made in the past as well, and can really see their limitations.
This is a good segue, I think, into the mental game chapter here, which is going to be a rich one for us, considering your work with Hazel and just how thoughtful you are around this aspect of climbing. So I want to make sure we dive into this as much as we can. I'd love to explore this aspect of bouldering in particular that's quite foreign to me, which is you all are of a different breed, I feel like, where you can go session after session after session, potentially not even doing all the moves, or maybe not even doing a move. And I on the other side, Burden, where you say you dropped the last move 11 times. I think there was a single session that I was reading about on your Patreon where you dropped it 3 times in just one session, where it's just so achingly close. Whereas contrasted with Spots of Time, I believe you shared it was maybe 10 days or so before you were even able to do the moves. And I'm curious on the mental side here, where I, as a route climber, really like to have a sense of progress. I like to do big links. I want to make sure, like, every time I go out to a project, I want to make sure I can really see the progress of my training or my work on that route. In the type of bouldering that you do, the progress can be quite small or almost seem like it's not happening at all. And how do you handle that mentally? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm in the way in which you describe, yourself as a sport climber and struggling to understand the psychology around bouldering, I would say I'm probably more so a boulderer who struggles to understand anything about sport climbing. I've done shockingly little sport climbing.
You got to put on a rope. We're gonna get you in a harness. We're gonna get you on a rope. Maybe Will can get you out to Excalibur.
Well, I had one try at Excalibur when I was traveling with Sean in December. It's quite fun.
Oh,
well, actually, no, it's kind of scary, but I enjoyed it.
So then you know Hazel well. You can take her flight school. If there's a little fear of falling in there, we can work through that.
Yeah, no, actually, not so much a fear of falling, but a fear of trusting my own rope management. But not an irrational fear, I'd say. But yeah, no, okay. The psychology of bouldering, because I find I struggle to relate to the psychology around people who route climb. So you talk about being able to see bigger, longer links of moves and kind of see more tangible progress in many ways. But I think, and feel free to challenge this if you think it's wrong, I feel like more generally, sport climbers are much more willing, or as a general sense, sport climbers seem to put a lot more days into climbs than boulderers put into boulders. I'm not sure if you agree with that. I know of multiple people who have had absolute epics in terms of we're talking 100, 200 sessions kind of on sport climbs. And totally. I can name a handful of people that have done that in bouldering. It's very, very rare.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, we're willing to put in longer days, but typically within that, you're still seeing progress from day to day that maybe, because you're looking at maybe 100 moves as opposed to 8 moves or 12 moves. So yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think Spots of Time, you said, was your longest, the most days that you put in on a project. I think it was 30 something. Is that right?
Yeah, until I climbed Arrival of the Birds. Yeah.
Yes. So that's right, because that's been spanning years now.
Yeah. I think it's probably more sessions, but there was just a lot of specific training around it, which Spots of Time I didn't do.
That's right. Okay, good. Well, I'm excited to explore that a little bit more, but I'll let you get back to just the psychology of bouldering, in that you can go many days without, seemingly, at least from my seat, making much progress. And I know when I had a conversation with Drew Ruana not too long ago, he talks about perhaps a move from the outside doesn't seem like one's making progress on it, but internally you feel a little bit better body position, or you feel a little bit more solid on a hold, a little bit more tension, and this kind of thing. So it's surely more nuanced than I'm making it out to be, but it also does feel like there could be a psychological burden to such small or seemingly small progress. How do you keep that psyche going?
Yeah, I think it's as much as a psychological thing as it is a physical thing. I'm trying to think of an analogy, but it is it's all the training I've done and the physicalities I've developed, is kind of a set of tools that I have, and it's just a real puzzle that I'm piecing together. And I think I would definitely struggle to put days and days into a move that I never felt I was even capable of. As in usually it's oh, I don't feel close to that move, but I don't feel like I've understood it yet. So I can't really make the decision as to whether I'm capable of it or not. Say if I'm just trying to reduce this down to say if you just have a massive move from an edge to an edge, or you have a really bad edge and you jump to another edge and you're feels like there's no nuance to it at all, and you just don't feel anywhere near it. And the limitation is oh, I feel like I've understood the move, and I just feel totally incapable of doing that kind of thing. I don't think I'd just keep trying that. I would, if it was a climb that inspired me, I would train for it. And I guess you could just see spending time on it as a form of training. And I think often lots of boulders do that. You see people with mega sieges, and they probably are almost training specifically on the climb itself. I've never really done that. I've kind of more done a try something, understand it, figure out what skill sets I need to work on, come away, and then go back once I've kind of leveled up a little in those fields. So I think generally I'm willing to keep trying a move, because it feels a puzzle for me to like figure out how to do it optimally. And I find like, I think I would agree with the conversation you referenced with Drew about like, there's like definitely very like tangible progression for me in like my psychology around a move, even when I still haven't done it. So it can be like just like playing around with different things. And then there is like a point often when like I'll have played around with loads of options, and there'll often be like a bit of a crossroads of like, okay, like trying to understand which of these moves is likely, like which of these methods is going to like progress more with time, and like kind of like as I recruit into the move, and like kind of there's often like a point where like I commit to a certain method, and it feels like I feel like I often gamify the process, and it feels like quite exciting. And to see that then like slowly piece together into like actually doing the moves, and then like kind of refining them to like refining sequences, and like kind of there feels like there's like loads of layers to the puzzles, and that it's like often not even just like when you choose a method to do the move, it's not for the sake of doing the move the quicker, but thinking it in a like a larger context of the climb. Like you might be like, I can do the move more reliably this way, but it's more physical. Oh, but it's a last move. And so I'm like never going to get there without being slightly gassed. Like, so like there's like a lot of like factors that you bring into play. And I find it really satisfying piecing all those parts together. I'd be interested kind of when you say you were referencing that you had a project that you've been working on for about a year. From your perspective, when like you were saying you were still seeing tangible progress with that, is that like in terms of like physical progress, is the progress always contingent on like the physicalities of what you do in a session on the wall, like in terms of like longer links or like more moves in a row, that kind of thing? Is it always contingent on that actual like performance based thing? Or like, do you ever like consider the psychology around things as well? Like, as in like, could you be like, oh, this is my red point crux, and I keep like dropping off there, and maybe you have a session where you like see regression in your links, but like you feel more confident in that move. Like, could that still be seen as progress for you?
That's a good distinction to make. And I think like at first glance, or like my first impression, if you were to just say, progress on a project, I think I do default to thinking just more about the tangible progress in terms of just like pushing my high point a little bit higher, which for a long time on the project was the case. It was very much like a low crux, then some moderate climbing, and then a red point crux. And for the first maybe 10 sessions that I put on it, and I'm a weekend warrior, maybe I get out there once a week if I'm lucky, maybe just a few times a month, I was seeing my high point push ever higher until kind of the end of this past fall season, when conditions were at their best, where I just was falling just a couple moves from the chains. And so I wasn't able to push it higher. And that's when it started I started to get in my head a little bit more. That's where some of the doubts and discouragements were starting to come in. But I did experience a bit of what you were just mentioning, which was psychologically feeling like I was making progress, even though I wasn't pushing the high point higher. And that was just feeling much more confident through the low. The hardest moves on the route are the first 4 bolts. And while I wasn't pushing the high point any higher, I could feel in my sessions progress because I was flowing through those bottom harder moves with much more confidence, much more joy, more ease. I was getting to rests, feeling less fatigued. And so even though I still wasn't able to get those last few moves, and it's something that I need to work on here now in the off season, I did feel progress, even though from the outside, I guess maybe just objectively, I wasn't getting any higher. Subjectively, I was feeling a lot better. So I think maybe that's a little sample of, I guess, what you and boulderers feel when you're on a project that where you can't consistently just continue to push the high point higher because maybe there's only 10 moves, but you have to find the progress within some links that you're making or just confidence and flow around different body positions that you're having.
Yeah, no, it is interesting to hear that, because that like subjective progress. I think at times I've tried to like almost detach myself from the like objective progress in terms of like what that looks like in terms of like the number of moves or like how close you get to the boulder or the links in that like, and I don't know if this is just fundamentally how it can differ between bouldering and sport climbing, but I often have found like going into sessions or like coming away from sessions with the intention around the learnings from a session has felt like a really like quite a valuable change, in that like often I can like do moves or like do links, and like it's amazing how fewer moves or how fewer like you can have a lot of uncertainties in methods, and like you can be like you can be reliable through sections, but like have not understood all like the nuances of like all the footholds, or like it's amazing how like complicated climbing can be with forelimbs, and especially just like angular natures of rock, and like there was like so many like mechanics to think about, and they can like I often see there are always points of uncertainty. I don't think I've ever gotten even remotely close to understanding the nuances of every move and like every handhold and every foothold on a climb. I would be surprised if anyone ever has on a climb. Like it's so nuanced, because it varies every day depending on like conditions, on like kind of skin and yeah, all of these things. But I think like it's been really nice for me psychologically to have made that change, in that like I think I have had a tendency to like, it can be quite easy to be quite hard on yourself, right? Like when you like then don't see progression, and it can feel like I've definitely been in a camp where I like see some regression and feel shit about myself because of it. But I actually think it's rare that I see those kind of sessions nowadays as like failed sessions, or I don't know what language you use to describe them. Like kind of, I think I'm doing much better at like seeing viewing sessions where I don't see like physical, like tangible progress, and much more viewing them through the lens of learning. And if I learn one thing about one move, that feels like a good session, because like, I don't know, like if you're trying a boulder on a trip, or like kind of more generally in a short space of time, like you haven't got weaker. like unless you're thinking about multiple months, like you're not a worse climber, like as in like there is probably like other reasons for sake of that regression. And like to come away about like learning something about any move feels like totally valuable, as long as you don't like forget a load of the other stuff that you have like learned prior to it. If you're quite good at like logging, or like kind of whichever way you best learn these things, like that feels like a time well spent in my mind. And I think often climbing's a lot more fun for me through that lens as well, in that like if I have a session where like I am feeling worse for some reason, and I'm like, oh okay, these moves felt easier when I was here the other day. I'm not just like in frustration with myself for being like, maybe I'm weak, or like why aren't I able to do this. It's more like a curiosity or an interest into, right, okay, with the hand I've been dealt right now, what can I learn about this? And it feels intriguing, as opposed to kind of like, it can be humbling as well, but like it's not frustratingly humbling.
I want to make sure we have some time here to talk about some things beyond climbing, as well as get to some listener questions. So I think this provides a good opportunity for us to talk about issues or things in your life, advocacy work, your very thoughtful writings, your podcast, anything that you're psyched on and that's bringing you some purpose, some interest, some passion outside of your actual rock climbing yourself. And what would that be?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I definitely think in many ways so there are mediums in which I think about climbing or operate within the climbing world outside of the context of my own climbing, namely the podcast we've mentioned. I co-edit a magazine with a friend who lives in Bristol and another friend who lives in Oxford, and the two of us like kind of write the content, and then the other formats it.
What's the name of that?
The Spotter magazine.
Spotter magazine. Okay.
Yeah, so it's just a small scale magazine, but like it's like a creative project where it feels like, again, it's like nice to operate within climbing in like ways which feel like they contribute something to maybe like the people in climbing, or maybe just the climbing media landscape.
Is it printed, physically printed?
Yeah, just physically printed. Yeah.
Just physically printed. Check that out.
Yeah, I'm sorry for those online folk, of which we are acknowledging the limitations of physical print, but I think it has a lot of benefits as well, and maybe all helps to slow down the pace in which people digest media. And I do think something tactile, something a bit more slower pace, their messages can land a little more. But that's quite a special project. And similarly with the podcast, it feels like a real privilege actually to be able to like communicate so openly and authentically with so many people. Like, sometimes do of course question why it's interesting for people, but I feel incredibly grateful that people are like willing to listen to these things as well. And I definitely think these kind of like projects and putting energy into these, I think like in many ways has given me a lot more contentment to pursue my own climbing as well. In many ways, full-time climbing in the past has felt to me like quite like a relatively like self-centered endeavor, which like obviously it is, but it's nice to like kind of interact a bit more. Like, as in like, I feel like I could easily, if I were just doing my own climbing, and my climbing is often quite solitary, I could easily feel very detached from the climbing world. And it's nice to like stay connected and like kind of integrated with like a community of pretty great people. So yeah, it's been like, I feel like really quite fortunate to have these like mediums to interact with people. It does feel like a real privilege to have some influence and some people who are like interested and willing to engage with like lines of thought, and like kind of, it feels like I can communicate about like, or advocate certain like ways of living which feel important to me, and maybe like ways of living which I would like to advocate. And like kind of, it feels like people are susceptible to like listening to that and attuning to that without me feeling like I'm just virtue signaling or like, because it does feel nuanced. So these kind of like projects operating within climbing space in like a context wider than my own climbing feel really special for me. That's for sure. You must have that with this podcast. It's in many ways as well. Like it's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the climbing side of your climbing isn't your profession, but like, I don't know if you find this, but like talking to climbers and like sharing climbing stories, it can like enrich your own climbing as well in some ways, right?
Absolutely. You know, this podcast it's been such a labor of love. Yes, I'm not a professional climber. I'm just a weekend warrior. I'm a dad. I got a couple jobs, and I've got, you know, a podcast that I'm trying to make my job. But one of the greatest pleasures that I get out of it is not only being able to connect with climbing heroes of mine, and of which I've talked to so many, from Lynn Hill and Peter Croft to yourself and Adam Andra and Beth Rodden, and a guy, you know, it's been a kind of a dream gig here to have the podcast. My wife calls it a very time-consuming and expensive midlife crisis, but here we are.
Well, you're sticking it out. I admire
it. That's right. It's working.
At least it's not fleeting.
That's right. I was just recently in Yosemite Valley, and I got to hang out and spend some time with Alex Honnold and Jordan Cannon, and I've climbed with those guys. So yes, the joke is on my wife that it's actually working. So that's been a joy, but also being able to connect with the community and people who listen to the podcast and meet up with them at the crag and have a session. And I was walking through Camp 4 and came upon Midnight Lightning, and there was a crew there, and that boulder is out of my league in terms of my ability to climb it, but they recognized me from the show and welcomed me in and let me session on it on their pads, and I pulled a few moves, and it was just such like a special moment for me to connect with the community in that way. And I have heard you talk about that. I'm recalling the film Mastery that came out a little while ago that was just beautifully done. And you talked about in that wanting or being drawn or compelled even to contribute in kind of a collective way to this idea of mastery. And I think you're doing that with your climbing, but also you're doing that in ways outside of climbing with your writing and with this content that you're creating. And I'm curious now, as you've had time to reflect a bit, it's been a bit since Mastery and you're continuing on this pursuit to mastery, perhaps a journey that doesn't have a destination. I'm not sure if there is a destination when it comes to mastery, but do you feel, do you feel that this contribution that you're making towards mastery and these climbs that you're doing and in the content you're creating, is that a fulfilling pursuit for you?
Yeah, and I don't want to say yes. I mean, it sounded very casual, yeah, but I don't think I say it lightly. Like, I am definitely not one who has like blindly pursued climbing because I could and it's fun. I think it was like, for me, almost counterintuitive to step away from academia and pursue my climbing. And I was very hesitant and very doubtful about doing that. And I think actually it was absolutely right for me. And right now in my life, it feels like I am doing the thing that is right for me, which has felt like a really special acknowledgement. I feel incredibly grateful for that. And I don't want to get complacent within that. Like, I think these are like kind of these questions around like kind of what contributions we can make and like kind of where one would find fulfillment. It feels like there's a value in not viewing it so concretely, but more like a constant line of questioning. And it's like, I feel like I benefit from checking in, and it varies obviously throughout. Obviously, my conviction in that is like not totally consistent, but yeah, right now it feels like I have a good balance of like emphasis of my own climbing practices in my life and also consideration to the influence in which that has over the people who engage with it. And so whether that's through the form of like communicating what the climbing offers me and how that can, hopefully how climbing can enrich others' lives in the way in which I find it has like enriched my own. Maybe the way in which people interact with outdoor spaces or more wider environmentally. And it feels like I have a really amazing opportunity through the conduit of climbing and the shared interest I have with the people who like engage with my climbing travels. I feel like I have a really real opportunity to like kind of inspire certain qualities of like how a relationship with climbing can cultivate quite a special lifestyle for sake of one's own interest and happiness, and also more wider to others and places, people and places.
Well, I really appreciate it. I just love your presence in the climbing world, and it does create I think a refreshing kind of exhale, a bit of a deep breath for the media landscape, of which I'm a part of, where it moves fast and we focus on kind of flashy ascents and grades and that, and so to have a little bit more of a connection to nature and the natural world, environmental issues, as well as just the process and the love of climbing at the highest level, it's quite inspiring. And you've been incredibly generous with your time now. I can see the sun is setting out there over the beautiful Lake District. So I will wrap things up here. But Aidan, just an absolute joy and honor to share this time with you, man. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for putting so much thought and consideration into these nice questions. And and likewise for sharing the time.
All right, that clips the anchors here on this episode with Aidan. So thoughtful in so many areas. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. I just could listen to Aidan talk about anything for hours. It's like a massage for my brain. And you know what? Guess what? We actually did talk for another hour, and that is now available as a bonus episode for patrons and subscribers. And oh man, check out what we covered in this one. We do a deep dive into breaking down his V17 ascents, including where they stack up next to one another in terms of the grade and the difficulty. We do a full video breakdown of his work on Spots of Time with some footage that very few people have seen up to this point. And then we explore his process and his near send of Burden of Dreams. We talk about his ascent of Arrival of the Birds, a climb that might even be harder than V17. I mean, I'm asking the question, see what he says. And then Aidan brings it back down to earth here and gives some advice and notes common pitfalls for newer climbers. And then, of course, we roll into some questions from patrons, including one patron who asked where Nolly is. And Aidan kind of knows. It's such a good bonus chat, you guys. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 60 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners. And there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glenn Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.